So welcome to the Investment in Innovation for Impact. My name's Louise Brockman. I'm the founder and CEO of the Advisory Board Centre, and I'm here with our very special guest and certified chairs, Dr. Maren Schweizer. Welcome, Maren. And welcome, Nigel Hennessy.
Hi. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, this is a powerful conversation today about investing in innovation, specifically for impact. And I think before we get started into the content, Maren, I'll start with you. Why is this topic particularly important for you?
I'm running the corporate venture capital arm, family office of our firm, and we are investing into startups, while we do have more major businesses in the electronic sector. So it's so difficult to bridge the old to the new, the zero to the new. It's a very tricky path. Many things did work out well for us, and some didn't. So today I'd like to share our journey of learnings and where the pitfalls are.
Terrific. Look forward to it. Thank you, Maren. And Nigel, why is this topic particularly important for you?
For many of the same reasons, actually. Look, I've been in the innovation game, pardon the expression, for a long time now, and I've actually seen the good, the bad, and the ugly, mostly in startups. And in fact, I've actually looked at probably over 1,000 companies in that time. So I've seen a lot, and I've seen a lot of disasters. I've seen a lot of successes. I've seen ones that should have been a success but have failed, and I've seen ones that should have failed and been a success. So you get to know a lot about the market and why the investment side is, and of course the innovation side is so important for businesses. So that's what, yeah.
Terrific. Well, I look forward to hearing from both of you. I'll just provide a bit of background, though, to where we see innovation in the advisory board space. And I guess this is the last session that we have around our innovation series. But the Advisory Board Centre, for those that have joined for the first time, our role as a professional body is to really raise the standard of the advisory board sector and really drive value for the professionals and then the organisations that they serve. We operate globally in over 20 countries, and we've supported over 900 businesses in the last 3 years in really getting clarity around their advisory structure before they actually engage with their advisors. Our key role is around professional development, education and advocacy work, really based on our research. The State of the Market report really highlights areas around the startup sector and where is it that they're actually investing their time and why they have advisory boards. If we look at total amount of advisory boards in the startup and scale-up sector, it's generally 29% of all advisory boards are in this space, which is that's a fair size of the advisory board sector, but there's a high level of volatility. So they start things, they stop, they get time poor, cash poor, and always looking for access to networks and improving their business investment literacy. And that really enables them to execute because they are some of the key barriers to scale for this part of the market. When we see their advisory structures, we see that they invest more and look effectively at having advisor panels rather than fixed advisory boards to be able to support them during the volatility at that time. What they focus on in their investment in their advisory structures is generally around testing their market, identifying what their business model is, and entering into international markets. And so this is where we see that their advisory board focus is during this period of time. I'd like to hand over to Maren now to talk about your particular case study. So over to you, Maren.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Louise. Let's kick off. Next slide, please. So the cobra is actually a very nasty animal, and it's also around in innovation and investment to a certain extent. Let me give you some examples. Next one. We all know vaping. If you have teens at home, you're probably discovering your kids vaping all around. So there's been a good intention actually about vapes replacing cigarettes, but it really opened up a completely new market and has hooked a lot of teenagers and kids to consuming nicotine more and more. Next. Same in aviation. So Airbus spent a lot of efforts on reducing cabin noise already on their previous flagship airplane, the A380, even more now on the A350. While doing that, it fired back because the passengers heard more noise about fellow passengers at the toilets as well as the galley. Next. Another example about the Cobra effect is, for instance, Wells Fargo. It's just one example. There are many companies who have difficulties to boost their sales. So the logical first step to find a solution for that problem is let's incentivize our sales teams. And Wells Fargo is one example where that turned very, very bitter, up to fraud and unethical behavior of the large part of the sales team. Next. So what is the Cobra effect actually I'm talking about during the last slides? Actually, the Cobra effect has its roots in British colonial India, where there has been a problem with too many cobras around. So then the British started issuing awards to locals who turn in cobra skins. It didn't work very well actually those days because everybody started actually growing cobras, killing them, and turning in the skins. While some cobras are also fled and actually increased the problem. So that's where the Cobra effect is from a long time ago, still valid today. Next one. So what is the Cobra effect about? It's a lot about the linear thinking. Many startups talk about a problem statement and then present a solution. That's their innovation. We identify the problem and we have a solution to solve it, which is most likely more cost-effective, more innovative, not yet done in the market or disrupting how others do it. This is the linear thinking. So this is very problematic, especially if you make your financial decisions in where to put your money into innovation and investment from our experience. Next one, please. So a little bit about our firm. So we are a dinosaur. We are 172 years old. If I say that in the public, I normally get the feedback, dinosaurs, they're extinct. They're not there anymore. So why are you a dinosaur? So that's all about innovation. It's about making things better than they were yesterday. We are trying to do that with new product development, with accelerators, with incubators, with venture building, as well as investing into startups we believe are interesting to help our firm to evolve. We have 3,000 talents. We did 2 IPOs, one in Germany, one in Singapore, and there's been endless changes. Next. So now I'd like to take you on the journey, why we are doing what we are doing. I'm focusing on a more holistic approach, not on selection criteria, why we invest into startups often or not. So we've identified a triangle. I like to call it Bermuda Triangle here in Southeast Asia. Next. So it's about markets, policies, and ecosystems. Let's look at the markets first. For example, Indonesia. Indonesia is a very large country with 270 million people living there. They're all very young. There are thousands of islands, 10,000s of villages. And looking at the telemedicine sector, most of these little villages, they used to have a doctor, guru style like doctor, I would want to say, not a specialist, who was there for everybody in the village. Most villages now, they don't have a doctor anymore because nobody wanted to have that job anymore in Indonesia. So they need to go to a bigger city. There are no pharmacies, there are no ATMs. In Indonesia, Around 80% of the Indonesians don't have a credit card. Around 50% don't have a bank account. So just imagine that customer journey. You are in a little village. You hurt your knee. There is no local doctor. You need to drive to a clinic, which is 1-2 hours away. That's not possible on your two-wheeler. You're getting a friend who has a car to go there. Then you are at the clinic. You need to pay cash up front. You don't have a bank account or no credit card, so you need to make sure that you have the cash on hand. You see where the customer journey trouble is from. And then you go home, forgot to drop by the pharmacy next to the clinic, and then you don't get your meds. So the story starts again. You also don't have an insurance coverage because in Indonesia, many locals, they don't have an insurance coverage. So you have to take all your family savings to pay for very expensive medical treatment. So this is an example for the market drivers. We want to understand and look into it. That's why telemedicine in Indonesia took off so well. It all started with having a video chat with a doctor, then emerged in pre-selection criteria on which doctor is the right doctor for you, the specialist, then adding an insurance coverage on the platform, e-pharmacy delivery, payment transactions, and so forth. So that entire journey worked very well and is an interesting market. So that's where we look onto. We want to understand the underlying market drivers first, even before we look into investing into any company who is active in that region, in that field. Second is the ecosystem. You don't want to be alone. You never want to be alone. You might think you are the strongest, you are the toughest, you know all what you need to know. You have a great team, great people. No. We only go where there is well-established ecosystems. And the third topic, which is important, is the policies. I'll give you an example later. And then the company comes in, secondary data is not good enough. Secondary data is market research data, the size of a market, the peer group analysis, also force or value propositions of your competitors. If you look into startups, we want to run product experimentation together with the startup if it has not yet been done. That's all about primary data. So it's not what a customer is saying, it's action-based, behavioral-based. This helps a lot to de-risk and validate the company's value proposition in an attractive key market. Let's look at the next slide together. That's how it looks, and that's why we are based in Singapore, focusing on Singapore, Indonesia, and Vietnam as the Bermuda Triangle. So the policies, obviously, in Singapore are well set. There's a digital smart nation policy. There's a sustainability that's Green Singapore 2030 a policy framework in place. And all initiatives, all tax incentives, and so forth are clearly focused on these two policy patterns. And then we see an ecosystem. So it's about stability. It's governance, regulation, which needs to be in place. How quickly can you incorporate a business? Example, in Singapore, you need 2 steps, 1.5 days. In some countries, that might take up to 20, 30 steps, 45 days. There needs to be dry powder, a lot of money. We are basically co-investing with other investors. Talent base is the most important. Nigel said that in his first sentence. It's all about people. And there's also the network. And then the markets, the connections, that's about free trade agreements not to be blocked, and the market drivers. It's size, it's old to new, it's zero to new. So is there room actually to establish brand new business models? How do the consumers look like in Southeast Asia, Singapore, Vietnam, and Indonesia? 50% are below 30. That's a growing customer base. They have more money on their hands to spend into certain businesses, and there needs to be growth. That's the overall perspective. If we identify that, we are good to go. Next one, please. So that's how the ecosystem in Singapore looks like. To date, there are more than 100 incubators and accelerators. There are more than 300 venture capital investors. and there are a lot of research institutes, academia, and they're all set on the same targets. We do have, meanwhile, more than 400 family offices here in Singapore. There's been a big inflow from Hong Kong recently, actually, because Singapore is attractive to be, also for the business families, for the next generation, and it's a safe place with the policies in place. So next one. So now let's look at another example. What we believe is the driving factor, the digital powerhouse. So if you look at gross merchandise value, Southeast Asia looks very, very attractive. It's 2020 to 2025 expected figures. These figures we see here, we've adopted them post Ukraine war already, with certain implications on the growth drivers. So this is attractive, Southeast Asia. Next. So we believe that the next big thing is going to be mobile wallet users. You've heard that from me before. You know, it's very difficult to transfer money. It's very costly. You don't even have a credit card, but you have the wallets on your apps. So Indonesia is going to be the fastest growing market, as well as Vietnam. Singapore is the beachhead market because here regulation chips in very early. So it's good to be active in Singapore and then deploy to the other markets. It's for the cardless and unbanked. So again, we are going back to the underlying market drivers in our end markets. If they're intact and showing high CAGR, we are good to go. And then we are looking at the startups who have a value proposition in this investment domain. Next one, please. So that's the triangle we are operating in. It's Singapore, Vietnam, and Indonesia. Telemedicine kicked off very well in Indonesia. It's now kicking off in Vietnam. The digital wallets are both kicking off in parallel very well in Indonesia and Vietnam. While Singapore is making a lot of efforts to regulate, to protect consumers and to protect investors in the retail market.
Thank you so much, Maren. There's so many questions I've got, and I'm going to hold off on that and then head to Nigel, and then we'll move into a conversation from there. So thank you, Maren. Nigel, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Well, I thought I'd give you a quick case study before we go to that slide. So go back a step. But I thought I'd just do a quick case study first, all right? Because I thought just to try and set the scene. This was some years ago. I was actually asked to look at a company which was doing something which was rather clever. They developed a testing kit, a pathology testing kit for females. So when they actually, pardon the expression, had a wee, they actually would wee into a container, which would take away the first from the second samples, and therefore reduce the number of false samples which are taken. They used a cornstarch product, which was actually really quite clever. It was relatively low cost. They thought this would be a marvellous thing to use for ladies, and of course it would be. But they didn't understand the market, because the market is actually full of companies which are pathology labs, which generally are paid by the government, and they're not paid on successful samples. They're actually paid on the number of samples, and therefore it's in their advantage to actually understand that there's actually going to be more negatives, and they get paid more if they get more negatives, if you like. So it's an interesting way to set the scene, if you like, about what we're talking about today. So if you go to the next slide, whoops, gone the wrong way. That's it. I just thought I'd give you a quick bit of background so to see where I've come from. I've actually myself been involved in 16 startups. Where I've been a founder or a C-level, we'll call it C-suite executive. 2 were sold, 5 are still operational, and the remainder, about 56%, are actually dead. They died and most of them which I closed down for various reasons, and sometimes I closed them early. I didn't close them late. Luckily for me, I've never lost a dollar in those ventures, which has been good. Now, on top of that, I've also, because I did do a lot of work for government over a number of years, I've actually looked at over 1,000 startups working with government, and also for a couple of the family office groups. And out of the 1,000 or more than 1,000 I've looked at, probably 100 of those got recommended for grants, probably 80 of them probably got grants, 25 operational or sold, and there's 55 dead. So the numbers are quite interesting again. And what happens with many companies, and by the way, one of those companies was Canva I looked at. So Canva, when they came to me originally, was only 3 people. So it was very early days. It's now one of those, what do they call it? A unicorn. In this case, probably a golden or unicorn. It's even better. But anyway, I've found over my time that looking at various companies and using my background, which is very much an analytical background. I come out of intelligence. I worked for many years in the UK in defence intelligence, and I'm actually a mathematician by background. That I worked out that there are many different reasons why companies fail. And I started to analyse those some years ago, and even published a few articles in the Institute of Company Directors. So if you go to the next slide. So what can actually go wrong? And these are the classic things of what can go wrong with a company. And one of those is poor or badly constructed value proposition for the customer, i.e. you don't know who the customer is or what he actually wants. You tried to have the wrong sales channel. The revenue model is just not attractive. And by the way, price should never be something which is what you're driving your competition on. You're forgetting that influencers are out there who actually will support you or in fact could actually go against you on your product. So that needs to be recognized as well. Insufficient funding, of course, too much competition, i.e. it's too much a competitive field. Weak intellectual property, regulations can change. Timing is, I think, is one of the classic ones, i.e. either being too slow or even too early. Many good ideas. Now, if I go back to my original list, I said many of those I closed down. They didn't close down because they weren't successful. They closed down because they were too early. And in fact, if I'd waited another 2 or 3 years, they probably would have been very successful, but they were just too early. The market wasn't there. One of those companies was actually a clean tech company. So before clean tech was the main thing. Next one is the management team. And finally, disruption. And then, of course, at the very end is bad luck. And that's the one thing you can't do much about. Purely bad luck can actually be a real problem. And what you need to understand, particularly with disruption, is that occasionally you may come up with a really good idea, but the only way to get it to go forward is by using some form of pivot. And so you actually look at changing direction. As a very quick example there, I had a company which was in clean technology, and I had another one which is in water management. I had another company in ag tech, and it had to do a major pivot and a rebranding to get it to go. And I actually took it to the USA. I moved the company, which was this ag tech company, from being an Adelaide-based business to becoming a Californian-based business, and also launched into a few other sectors with that particular company. And that company is still going today quite successfully. Right, let's get to the clevery bits. And I call this the digital twin, because the key thing, I think, on any company, if you're a founder or if you're an investor or if you're an advisor or on the board, is to do your due diligence. And what I found the best way of doing the due diligence, because everyone sits there and does it, they go through the routine of looking at the numbers, they go through the process of looking at the management team or whatever, and they take a punt. At the end of the day, they take a punt. What I've tended to do, and I started doing this when I founded a company back in 1988, 88 was actually. And I formed a technique of developing a review on opportunities, and that review I still use today. So I've been using it for a long time. I used it when I was the Deputy Managing Director of British Aerospace for measuring subcontractors. I used it in Thorn EMI. I've used it in CabCharge even. So I've used it a number of different places in my career, and I found that creating this digital twin of a company allows you to actually come up with a good process to do a proper due diligence on a company. So I created a thing which I called a cosmic canvas, and that I use as the framework for my digital twin, which I'll cover in a few seconds' time. I then go through what I call a litmus test, and that's been put together based using on choice modeling techniques. So it works out really which of the likely factors which will drive a business and what are their priorities. So that becomes the litmus test. And I think I said before, like Maren said earlier, which is that my personal view and the view of most VCs is that the number one ranking item is always management, followed by management, followed by management. So it's always about people. They're the three key things for a business. They must get the management right. If you get the wrong management, sorry, no, you don't go anywhere. The other things we look at is shortfalls. We look at where the shortfalls come from, strategic objectives, actions for improvement, and then you provide a ranking between different companies or strategic opportunities. It's not that hard to do, but it actually gives you if you like, a structure to work through. So if you turn the page now, I'll take you through the canvas very quickly, and it's changed color. That's okay. And I've got everything on that sort of pinky color on the left is what's basically internal to the company. All right, how we fund it, our value proposition, our competitive advantage, what we are developing, our solution, our organizational structure, which sits in the middle, because that's absolutely critical, and it's actually a big box, as you can see, and then our path to market. So those are the 5 areas which are critical to the company. And then you got the interfaces of those activities with the outside world, particularly with your customer, and that includes the business model, the strategy for the customer market, the revenue model and pricing sensitivities, what the customer actually needs or wants, and of course, who is actually the customer. And that one may sound surprising, that many people get that wrong. It may seem quite remarkable that many people do not understand exactly who the customer actually is. I go back to that point I made earlier about the female testing device for pathology. They thought the customer was the actual woman buying that product, but women don't buy the product. Pathology labs do, and they actually had the wrong customer. She is the influencer, and that's why number 8 at the top there, the beachhead, the influencers are so important, because they can actually influence the market, but the customer may not be the person you think it is. All right, next slide, please. All right. Now, when I actually put all these numbers together, what I actually do, I build well, I should go back a slide, actually. It might be an idea. I'll go back to the original one, because it's probably better to go back to that one. But when I actually use this model, each of those areas I rank, I give them a score between 1 and 5, how we fund it. I have a methodology for doing that, which I call this litmus test. So how we fund, if we've been funded by venture capital, if we've been funded by sales, the higher the level means the more certainty you have of being a great business. So what you're trying to do here is compare your business, which is what you put on this digital twin canvas model, with what is in fact the best company you can think of. So if you're looking at, say, Apple Computers, or you're looking at, I don't know, IBM, or looking at BHP, you're trying to compare yourself with one of those companies and say, well, how do I fit? How do we fund? Well, Apple obviously will fund itself through its sales. So to try to match that, to try to get a 5, you've got to be selling absolutely 100% all the time and doing very well. Your value proposition must be great. You've got to have a really good solution the market wants, the best management team on the planet. All these things will give you a ranking of 5 in every category. And if you can do that, then the chance of your success is 99%. It never gets to 100. It's asymptotic. So it never gets to 100%, but it makes you a good chance. What I found through process here of looking at over 1,000 companies is that the 75% score overall, and it's weighted, I should point out, gives you about a 1 in 3 chance. So it's not great, even at 75% score. You don't get a great throughput. in terms of success, but it comes down, it gives you the ideas and it helps you develop the strategies which you need to think about how to develop your business going forward to make it better. Now I'll go to the next slide because it's probably more important. What you then come up with, and this is one which I put together for a company not that long ago actually, and what they actually had is that they had a number of different services and products within the company, and I built a litmus test. I built the canvas for each and every one of those products and services and worked out where their deficiencies were. Now, what this map is showing is, I call it a heat map. And what it actually shows is that, for example, Service 1, their biggest deficit in terms of their service is management. And they got a big hole there, and it's 12.1%. It's a level of improvement they could make on their overall score if they sorted management out. And you can see across a number of those, management is actually a major issue. Solution, actually, in this case, was a bigger problem for across the board, which really meant they didn't quite understand what they were selling. All right, and that's why that becomes an issue. At the other end of the extreme are some of the green numbers, which are quite low. As you can see, there's 1.9s there, there's 2.5s, that, and there's even some zeros, which I don't personally ever believe. But that tells you areas where they really can't do a lot to make any changes. They really can't make a lot of improvements. The areas where people tend to concentrate in terms of making a strategy, in this case, would be management, the business model, and the solution. And they're ones you're going to worry about the most. If you can then sort those out, you can then rescore your business based upon various strategies and come up with some ideas about how you can actually make an improvement on this cosmic overall digital twin. And as a result of that, you can see what strategies you should be adopting in the future. Now, for this company here, I made recommendations that one of their products, in fact, I think it was actually number one product, should actually be, number one one product would probably need to be refocused because it didn't actually understand its market, didn't have a great thing going for it. It's got a 10% hole in problem or need. In the case of Service 1, management is the biggest issue. Also with Service 3 was the management. I suggest we combine those two together and recruit project management, and that will bring those scores up. So that was the best thing to do, is to merge two services together and bring in project management, and that will be the way to improve that one. So when I put all this together, you end up with this model, which gives you a digital twin. It allows you to do the due diligence you need to do on a company. And it also gives you the strategies which you can adopt to work out how best the company is likely to go in the future if you follow those strategies. All right, so if we go to the summary slide. So my view is this, is that when you're looking at a company, whether it's your company, whether it's a consulting job you're working on, whether it's an advisory board, whether it's an investment or whatever, do your due diligence. And it's not just about the money. All right. There are many reasons why companies fail, but mostly it's around strategy and its execution, which really is about the people. It's about how you go to market. It's about all those sort of things which go with that. Standard due diligence generally is very subjective. And it's very much a personal touch. It doesn't have the ability to be, I suppose, structured in a way like the digital twin type model can be used. And I said, I think you should always try and look at building a digital twin. It doesn't have to be the same as I've done here, the canvas model. It could easily be something else which you think is more applicable to the business you're looking at. Build a twin, model it, see what comes out of it. And then try and assess your digital twin with what is the ideal business in that sector and to see how you score. If you don't score particularly well, then you need to think about how best you should do it. I score using this litmus test I mentioned before, which I'll be happy to share with some people. And then you can look at the improvements which need to be done. You can look at the weaknesses, and then the heat map, if it makes sense, I then apply if you're doing multiple products or services. And that gives you the ability then to do some fine grain work. Now, I've been using these, as I mentioned before, for many companies. I'm using it still today on my own companies. I use it to build up strategic plans. I use it to build strategies, my go-to-market strategies all come out of this. It's all based on basically on lateral thinking, and it helps your thinking process. But at the end of the day, it's just a model, and the real proof of the pudding is in the eating, so to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. It's really interesting getting both of your perspectives. I'm really interested, Maren, you mentioned to me previously that you assess about 100 pitches a month. And when you're looking at the amount of data and the level of complexity that I guess you've been presented, Nigel, you've got this really interesting digital twin. Maren, what kind of processes do you go through? Because you also get your employees involved as well, don't you?
Yeah, our analysts, they're in the end market. So they are focusing on, does the startup get the market drivers right? How much did they do real product experimentation? It's pretty much a scoring model like Nigel is doing in a different perspective. Did they do it? Or are they only working on assumptions, on words, not actions? And from there, we run into team assessments. Basically, we are running background checks. Just be aware if you're a startup, you have to have one story. It needs to be consistent. Your personal brand should be consistent. We do find a lot of inconsistencies, actually. And sometimes, it's as crazy as it is. We get 2 different pitch decks with 2 different value propositions, with 2 different ticket sizes and pre-money valuations for the same startup on the same day from 2 different parties. So one advice to all startups out there, build your one story and stick to it all along with all your stakeholders. May it be customers, may it be venture capitalists, may it be corporate venture capitalists or family offices. It will surface one day. And then market drivers are right, go-to-market strategies on it's a lean canvas we are looking on actually with the typical data. Then we are inviting the startups to pitch their company in a video recruiting tool. So we have a standard set of questions, and then they run through that interview process. What I like about it is actually that the entire team can have a look at it, and then we'll take it from there to a management call on it. The earlier the startup is, the less efforts we put into it, because it just doesn't make sense, If you are challenging an early stage startup on their market model, it doesn't really make sense. They are looking at the total available market, some, and then they make certain assumptions. They might be right or wrong. It's more on product experimentation. We believe in then looking at the underlying data. The more mature the company is, the more we look into the financials and projections and cash flow, not P&L. It's all about cash flow. How well is the cash flow managed, predicted, and can be adjusted if something goes wrong. So having said that, if a growth stage startup shows us that they have 10, 20 million orders on hand, we want to see actually the order book. What are the customers behind? What is the gross margin and so forth? Then we go on a deep dive.
Thank you. And with that, Nigel, the weighting process that would vary from in the assessment from one organisation to another, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it does. It does. I've got a generic model which I tend to use a lot, and it tends to be 90% correct. But I do change the weighting, and I said what I tend to do is use a choice model type process to do the weightings, because in some cases there are different priorities within an organisation. There's different factors which may come into play which you need to take into account. And therefore, for a company, for a brand new company, if I was doing it from scratch, I would generally build the business model, the digital twin, around that choice model, and see what comes out of it. And there's some factors which will always be the same. Management will always be the same. So those factors I put in there that generally are the major factors for a startup. But if you're doing, say, When I was at British Aerospace, for example, I used the same model, but I actually had different factors in there. And I had things like money wasn't really the objective because we didn't have a problem with cash. So we never had an issue with money, but we did have a problem about whether it was the right strategic direction for the company or whether it actually gave us the benefits we needed longer term. So those sort of factors became more important. And also our knowledge of the client, how our relationship had gone, because it was a standard customer. We were generally working with defence. So I needed to understand what our relationship was with a particular part of defence. And if that was really good, that was a good outcome. And the other one, of course, is location. I'm particularly with if you're doing tenders or doing an opportunity which you're pursuing, and you happen to be based in Sydney and the opportunity you're pursuing is over in Perth or is in Fremantle or maybe even further, or maybe in Singapore, it's actually much harder to win that business unless you are, in fact, local. So that also became a factor in the transition process, in the modelling.
No, very, very interesting. Just for our attendees today, if you've got any questions for Maren or Nigel, please pop them in the Q&A box, and happy to explore that with you. I'm interested from both of you. When we looked at the research from the State of the Market report, where advisory boards in that startup and scale-up market are looking at commercialisation models and entering new markets. That's where advisory boards are really focusing on. In investing in innovation for impact, what do you see the role of advisory boards actually playing with organisations that are really on an investment path? Maren, I might start with you.
I think it's very valuable to have an advisory board in place for early stage startups. Well, we need to be aware that in general, early stage startups, they have not the funds to pay advisory boards. So the advisors who engage with these stage startups, they need to be ready actually to accept equity to advise them. The biggest pitfall we see is wrong go-to-market assumptions. Over enthusiastic, over promising. Let me outline that a little bit. I think where early stage startups need a lot of guidance, it's about expectation management. They are trained to build a great pitch, which in most cases works very well. It's very close to over promising. Then they start to overpromise to their hires, to their employees about the big picture of the firm. We are going to be the next unicorn, and this very quickly turns sour. Then they lose their talents. Then they lose their culture. Then conflict is arising. The team is not focused anymore on their trajectory, and that's where I see really where the seasoned advisors can come in to guide the founders or co-founders on building a culture, setting expectations, and trying to fulfill them. And also to understand the way of communicating in difficult situations.
Nigel, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, I see the main role to be as a sounding board. There's nothing worse than a company which is... and they suffer from what I call the ugly baby syndrome, is they don't recognise they've got a baby which is actually quite ugly, but they think it's really quite pretty. And the role of the advisory board is to tell them the truth. And I think that's actually something which is really important for the advisory board to be able to do. It provides that level of independence. It's very difficult when you're actually a founder and you put all your time and effort and money into a company to actually accept that sometimes it's a good idea to pull the plug on it. And advisory boards can do that for you. They can help you. They can advise you, or maybe how to change direction as well. There's two little points I want to quickly raise, which I think are worth raising. One of those in Australia, and I don't know if Maren knows this, but Australian companies are not good at collaborating either. We tend to be very lonely animals. And so you get a company which will go to the marketplace and will compete with other companies in the marketplace. I found this particularly bad when I was in North America, when I was living in California for that period of time. This is in the water industry. We did a lot of work in that sector, and I used to watch I was always invited to the embassy functions whilst I was living over there. And you get these various groups rock up, and you get the groups rocking up from Israel, and they're all collaborative. You get the groups rocking up from Singapore, and they're all collaborative. And you get the groups rocking up from Australia, and they're all not collaborative. They're all whinging about the other guy. They're all complaining about the other company, about their competitors. They need to collaborate. And I think one of the other reasons why the advisory board has a major benefit is they can actually help do that. They can actually bring companies together. Companies working together are much stronger than companies working separately. So just think about that for a while. The other thing which Maren touched upon, which I think is another issue, is culture. Culture is a major problem and a major benefit. Now, when you're early on as a startup, the culture of a company is absolutely critical. But as you start to grow and start to get bigger, you find that most companies will have a cultural breakdown. And the culture has to change. And people need to recognize that the new CEO, eventually who will take over from the business, has got to start to create a new culture for the business. I know from my experience, I had a company, which I mentioned earlier, which grew from just me to 140 people. And the culture, to some extent, was created by me initially. And as it started to grow, I became the limiter, potentially, of the company, because I had the vision, I had the view, I knew what I wanted to do, and therefore it becomes a single point failure. If I'm wrong on something and I wasn't taking the right advice, which is another reason why the advisory board comes into play, and or maybe I wasn't open to the right advice, the company would fail, and yet I had no one around me which was willing to fight over that. So the culture becomes really quite important because you get bigger.
Thank you. Really, really important points. And Linda's put a note in here. Good to have you here, Linda. About great to see the use of greater use of maths in the process. Paul's got a comment here too. I think that it's important to frame as an advisory board what is a successful outcome, i.e., not you losing your shirt in the exercise. Could be the case of the right idea and the wrong time. Nigel, you mentioned that earlier, the timing is everything.
Absolutely. Look, on my view is how do you define success? Success isn't money. And I always used to tell people that when they were getting a company going, what is their longer term objective? What do they want to do? If they want to make a lot of money and go and sit on the beach somewhere, that to me is not a good startup. A good startup is one where a person sees the opportunity, can actually make the opportunity work, and eventually they will drive it in the right direction. Money will flow, money will follow. If it's a really good idea, money will follow. But people shouldn't be driven by money. They should be driven by excitement. They should be driven by the cut and the thrust, the fun, and all those factors. It shouldn't be about the money. If it's about money, please don't do it. And I used to tell people not to do things because it's worth a lot of money. I'm sure the guys from Canva, when they first started, didn't see it as being a multi-billion-dollar operation. They just saw it as being fun. They had a great idea which they could turn into some money. They could monetize it. If you could monetize a great idea, that's fantastic. But it's not about that. It's about all the other things that go with it. And don't lose sight of that.
Yeah, thank you. Maren, looks like you had a comment there.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you, Nigel, and I don't agree with you. If you look at the Israel startup community, what was always astonishing for me that there are a lot of deep tech startups, for example, in cybersecurity, risk modeling, and so forth, and they clearly tell you, "Hey, Maren, in 18 months, I'm planning the exit. So I'm hyperscaling my business to exit in 18 months." And I was questioning actually these statements for quite some time. But there's some truth and some energy in it, because this ends up in speed, in quick pivoting, in early risk modeling to keep that target in mind. And what you mentioned, Nigel, sometimes you need to stop your startup because it doesn't work. That's the most difficult part for founders. It's the baby. The good ones, they don't have a plan B. We always ask, what's your plan B? If there's a plan B or a side business, this is raising question marks in the investment community, because then the focus is not fully on the new venture. Yes. But then to give it up, for that, you really need advisors. And you need not only an advisor, you also need a trusted advisor, a mentor-like advisor who tells you, hey, now it might be just better to stop it. You can maybe park it or give it somebody else. It'll not work. I've seen so many founders fighting, and then they get more and more drained by being not successful. It's not only a question of months. I've seen some doing that for years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years.
Yeah, can I just add a bit to that? Because I was trying to get at really is that success not necessarily should be measured by money. That's what I was trying to get to. And I've got a company now which, and we've made it very clear to the market we're going to that we will list the company or we will exit the company in 2 years' time. So yeah, we have the same sort of process, but mine's more about timing. It's more about, I don't want to see this business going on for the next 25 years as being a $5 to $10 million turnover company. It's got to become part of something bigger, or it's got to list and become a $100 million plus company. So I don't see it as anything in between. And for me, success is turning it into that. And that's how I see it. But I'm just saying that I think it's important that people have who start off, if they're just thinking about money, particularly when they're young, 20, 25, that is, and the idea of sitting on the beach for the next 50 years is not a good idea, in my view.
Thank you. I've got a few questions here. We've got 3 minutes to go, so I might just choose one of you to have a quick response to it. Linda has got a question here, and I'll pose this to you, Maren. Do you find that innovators are reluctant to ask or heed advice?
No. Most innovators, they suffer more from the perception of not invented by me. And that leads a little bit to what Nigel said. It's a question of network. And that's so nice here in Singapore. It's an open community. So open innovation is not only a nice headline, it's our daily life. Competitors talk to each other, startups talk to each other, startups talk to MNCs. We are very open. It's a closed shop. It's a small island. So we're all in the same community. We see each other every week, several times on networking events. And we are used to talk. We are used to share our experiences, what works, what doesn't work. Not always being frightened of the others.
Thank you. There are a few comments here, and I'll only have time for one more question. I've got one here from Trevor, and Nigel, we'll start with you. In level of importance, particularly in the very early market entry stage, do investors place more importance on adoption or the financial model, i.e. profits?
Well, in my view, that's an interesting one. Adoption, really. The financial models at that stage is very speculative. I know there's also one here from somebody putting about Kerry Packer about cash flow, and he's right. I actually knew Kerry Packer. I actually worked with one of his advisors for a number of years, and Kerry Packer's view was transactional. He liked to be in a position where everything he got involved with had some form of transactional financial model, whereby it was just a click. Another click, another dollar, another click. And that to him was more important. So, yes, that to me is what drives the business. It's not so much the model which is created early on, because to be fair, it's likely to be grossly wrong. It's the other factors that come into play which drive the business.
Thank you. Thank you. Maren and Nigel, thank you so much for sharing today. I encourage all of our participants from the advisory board community, as well as from the broader business market, to connect in with both Maren and Nigel. Maren, thank you so much for giving us the whole view of the Bermuda Triangle in investment. I hadn't heard of that one before, but it certainly is really interesting listening to, the market concepts of investment Indonesia and 50% of people not having a bank account, we have a lens sometimes that we completely miss what the diversity of what people's lives are like, and where innovation is needed. So thank you so much, Maren.
Yeah, very welcome. You'll find me on LinkedIn. Please reach out to me if you have any questions. I'm there for you.
Thank you. And Nigel, thank you as always for your lens. And the digital twin is going to stay with me now forever. So thank you for that. And I also appreciate, Nigel, the work that you do on our Best Practice and Ethics Advisory Board as well in furthering the sector. It's really deeply appreciated. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. Please connect directly in with Maren and Nigel, and I look forward to seeing you next time.